They made surgery for the show, not a background detail, not a quiet subplot buried between the relationship drama and the family arguments. The transformation of the operating rooms, the compression garments, the swollen recoveries, the tearful before and after reveals, set to songs about rising and becoming, that became the entire engine of Darcey and Stacey Silva's second chapter on television. They handed the cameras a scalpel and said, "Film everything." And TLC did. And millions of people watched. And for a while, it worked beautifully. But something has shifted in the last few months. Something in the plastic surgery community, something in the comment sections, something in the way certain medical professionals are now talking about what they're seeing and what they think they're seeing when footage of the twins appears online. And what's being said is not what Darcey and Stacey's brand was built to handle. If this is your first time here, hit that like button and subscribe to the Tell All Tapes right now, because this channel covers the stories that the reunion episodes won't touch. And trust me, you do not want to be late to this one. Let's start at the beginning, because context is everything here, and without it, you'll miss why this specific moment matters so much more than the usual tabloid noise that follows these two around. Darcey and Stacey Silva did not accidentally become the surgery twins of reality television. That identity was constructed deliberately, episode by episode, season by season. Before the spinoff, before the Darcey and Stacey show had its own title card and its own theme music, Darcey was the heartbroken romantic, the woman who kept flying across the ocean looking for love and kept coming home empty-handed. That was her role in the 90-Day universe. The audience knew her for crying, for the airport scenes, for the relationships that unraveled publicly in ways that were genuinely painful to watch. But then something changed. The spinoff arrived, and with it came a rebranding so complete, so total, that it almost felt like a corporate pivot. The heartbreak was still there. It never fully went away, but it was now framed inside a larger story about transformation, about two sisters choosing themselves, about using the tools available to them, including medical ones, to become the versions of themselves they had always imagined. It was savvy television. It was emotionally resonant, and it gave the show a visual language that was impossible to look away from, because transformation, physical transformation, is one of the most compelling things a camera can capture. So, for several seasons, the formula held. They would announce a procedure. There would be the consultation footage, the nervous laughter before going under, the groggy post-op confessionals where everything was bandaged and bruised, but the tone was already celebratory. Then, the reveal. Always the reveal. Darcey crying, Stacey gasping. Their mother reacted. The narrative was clean, the arc was satisfying, and the audience kept coming back for the next installment. The problem with building a brand on that foundation is that it requires the story to keep going in one direction, forward, upward, transformative. But real medical journeys don't always cooperate with narrative arcs. Real bodies have their own timelines. Real outcomes don't always match the vision boards, and real medical professionals, the ones watching from outside the production bubble, don't have any obligation to stay quiet when they think they're seeing something that doesn't line up. And that is exactly where we are right now. Here's what you need to understand about the plastic surgery community online, because it's a bigger, more organized, and more medically literate space than most casual viewers realize. There are board-certified surgeons with hundreds of thousands of followers who do detailed breakdowns of procedures they observe in public footage. There are licensed nurses, estheticians, and medical content creators who have built entire platforms around analyzing what they're seeing in celebrity and influencer transformations. These are not gossip accounts. These are people with credentials, with clinical training, who apply that training to what appears in publicly available video. And increasingly, over the past several months, that community has been pointing its lens at Darcey and Stacey Silva. The specific conversation that has been building, and it has been building quietly, in comment sections and in forum threads and in reaction videos that don't always make it to mainstream celebrity gossip coverage, centers on what multiple licensed professionals are describing as visible markers in recent footage that suggests the sisters' surgical journeys may have moved into territory that warrants serious discussion. Not the cosmetic discussion, not the aesthetic debate about whether this look or that look is appealing. The medical discussion. The one about what happens when a series of procedures accumulates over time in ways that the body doesn't always absorb cleanly. One medical content creator, someone with genuine credentials, a real clinical background, and an audience of over 400,000 followers, posted a breakdown video analyzing recent footage of both sisters. That video crossed 2 million views. The comment section, which I would describe as a combination of concern, disbelief, and the specific kind of energy that only emerges when people feel like they've been watching something develop in slow motion and are finally seeing it named out loud, was not a peaceful place. It was the kind of comment section that production teams notice, that publicist screenshot. That ends up in conversations that nobody wants to have publicly, but everyone is suddenly having privately. Now here is where it gets complicated, and this is the part of the story that I think most coverage is missing entirely. When Darcey and Stacey have been confronted with questions about their procedures in the past, and they have been, repeatedly, by fans, by former castmates, by journalists doing profiles, the response has been consistent. Variations of, "We did our research," "We trust our doctor," "This is our body and our choice and our journey." And I want to be clear about something. Those statements are not wrong. Those statements represent a legitimate framework for how adults should be able to approach their own healthcare decisions. Nobody disputes that. The issue is not whether they have the right to make those choices. The issue is that by making those statements on national television to millions of viewers as part of a show that actively promotes and documents those choices, they created a form of accountability that did not exist before. When you tell a national television audience that you did your research, you are implicitly inviting that audience to check the research. When you document a medical journey across multiple seasons of a television show, you are creating a public record that medical professionals can analyze. When you position yourselves as examples, not cautionary tales, but examples of what this transformation journey can look like, you are setting a standard against which outcomes will eventually be measured. That's not a trap anyone set for them. That's the natural consequence of the brand they built. And the trap they are now in, and it is a trap, make no mistake, is a double bind with no comfortable exit. If they come forward and acknowledge that there have been complications, that things did not go exactly as shown on television, that the reality of their procedures was more complicated than the narrative suggested, then every episode where they smiled through recovery and declared how amazing they felt becomes a performance they sold to their audience as reality. That's not a small thing. In the influencer and reality TV economy, credibility is the entire asset. Once that credibility is questioned on something as fundamental as their own documented medical journey, the damage doesn't stay contained to that one topic. It bleeds into everything. But if they deny it, if the position becomes that everything is fine, everything has always been fine, the critics are just haters, and the medical professionals asking questions don't know what they're talking about, and then documentation surfaces that tells a different story, the credibility hit is not just significant, it's potentially irreversible. Because the audience forgives a lot, but the audience does not easily forgive being told something was one way when evidence suggests it was another. There is no clean version of this conversation. There is only which version of the truth surfaces first, and who controls the framing when it does. Now let's talk about the money, because this is a business story as much as it is a personal one. And the financial architecture of what Darcey and Stacey have built is far more fragile than the Instagram aesthetic suggests. Their entire post-90-day career, the second act, the one that survived beyond Darcey's multiple heartbreak storylines and elevated both sisters into something more than supporting characters in someone else's love story, is built on the transformation narrative. The show is about the procedures. The procedures are the show. They are not separable. You cannot have Darcey and Stacey Silva, the TLC brand, without the surgery journey as its central organizing principle. It is the engine, the visual identity, the content pipeline, and the emotional through line all at once. Which means that if the narrative around those procedures shifts, if the public conversation moves from empowerment and transformation towards something more complicated, more cautionary, more medically concerning, the show does not just take a hit in the press cycle. The show loses its reason for existing. TLC's calculation about whether to continue investing in this particular story changes the moment the story stops being one that audiences want to aspire to and starts being one that audiences watch with a different kind of attention. And it doesn't stop with the network. The medical tourism angle, the implicit and sometimes explicit promotion of going abroad for procedures, the suggestion that this approach is accessible and achievable and glamorous has been a quiet commercial undercurrent running through the show's later seasons. That angle evaporates the moment the conversation shifts. Any brand in the wellness or beauty space that has been in discussions with either sister, and there are always brands in those discussions with reality stars who have built followings on aesthetic transformation, those conversations do not survive a medical controversy with documentation attached to it. The brand managers who were interested yesterday are suddenly very busy with other projects. This is what I mean when I say the stakes are larger than they appear. It is not just about whether Darcey and Stacey are okay. I want to be clear as a human matter. The most important question is whether they are okay. But from a pure career and business standpoint, the stakes are existential in a way that a typical reality TV drama simply is not. Let me give you the character element because I don't think you fully understand how they got here without it. Both sisters, across every season of television they have appeared in, have demonstrated a very consistent and very visible pattern. External appearance functions as emotional armor. This is not a subtle reading. The show has documented it explicitly. Every significant difficulty, a relationship ending badly, a public embarrassment, a family conflict, a moment where the world felt like it was pressing too hard, was followed, sooner or later, by a new procedure, a new look, a new version. It became a coping language, a way of asserting control over something when other things felt uncontrollable. And I want to be careful here, because I am not saying that's wrong. I am not standing in judgment of that. People manage difficult emotions in many different ways, and some of those ways are more visible than others when your life is documented on camera. But I am saying that the show that profits from that pattern, that builds storylines around it, that frames it as empowerment without ever pausing to examine it as anything else, has never had an honest conversation about what it means to use physical transformation as a consistent response to emotional pain. Because having that conversation honestly would require the show to look at its own role in the cycle. And television shows do not typically critique their own most profitable content. That absence of honest examination is part of how they ended up here. When the people around you, the production team, the network, the fans invested in the transformation narrative are all financially and emotionally incentivized to celebrate the next procedure rather than question it, the feedback loop becomes impossible to interrupt from the inside. And speaking of the inside, the sister dynamic itself is something that needs to be examined more carefully than it usually is, because it plays a direct role in how the situation developed and why it may be difficult to course correct. Darcey and Stacey have each other, full stop, in a way that most people in the public eye do not have a reliable constant. Their bond is genuine, their loyalty is real, and across every difficult moment the show has captured, it has been the one relationship that held. I'm not questioning that, but there is a specific kind of vulnerability that comes with having your closest confidant be someone who shares your blind spots, who validates your decisions because she made the same decisions, who is, in the most literal possible sense, going through the same procedures at the same clinic with the same framing. When your inner circle is a mirror of yourself, there is no one positioned to say, wait. There is no friction. There is no voice that comes from enough distance to see the full picture. They have built something genuinely beautiful in their relationship with each other. And that same beauty has created an echo chamber where the signals that should prompt recalibration are instead amplified into confirmation. Whatever one sister is feeling, the other sister is feeling it too. Whatever one sister believes about the safety and success of what they're doing, the other sister reflects it back. That's a profound comfort in difficult times. It is also a structural limitation when the difficult time requires an outside perspective. And outside perspectives, right now, are saying things that the echo chamber is not designed to process. There will be a response. I want you to know that I know there will be a response, because there always is. And it will follow a pattern so familiar that you could script it before it happens. It will come in the form of a reel or a TikTok. Both sisters will appear together, the lighting will be good, the music underneath will be something with a beat that signals resilience, something that says, we are not shaken, we are not moved, we have been through harder things than this, and we are still standing. They will look into the camera with expressions of composed, serene confidence. Stacey will probably say something about knowing their truth. Darcey will probably reference the haters. There will be a combined tagline about self-love and authenticity, and it will get 100,000 likes from an audience that loves them and wants to believe them. And it will change absolutely nothing about the underlying conversation, because the audience that matters in this moment is not the bot followers, not the casual scrollers, but the core audience that has been watching this show since the 90-day days. The one that has real emotional investment in these two women and genuine concern underneath the entertainment. That audience has started asking questions. Not the performative questions of the comment section theater, real questions. The kind that a well-produced reel does not answer. The kind that requires either documentation or silence. And silence has started to feel like an answer of its own. Here is the core of it, stripped down to what it actually is. Darcey and Stacey have always framed every procedure, every recovery, every transformation as something they did for themselves. I'm doing this for me. This is my confidence. I'm becoming the best version of myself. These are the words. These are the exact words repeated across seasons, used as the emotional anchor for everything the show asks audiences to accept and celebrate. And in isolation, those words are not dishonest. People can choose to improve or alter their appearance for themselves, for internal reasons, for reasons that have nothing to do with audience approval or external validation. But watch the show back. Watch it with that framing in your head. I'm doing this for me. And then pay attention to how every single result is presented. Every reveal is a performance for someone else. Every result is shown to a camera, to family members, to cast members, to an audience of millions, and the validation of those reactions is woven into the emotional payoff of every single transformation storyline. Darcey's reveal isn't complete until someone gasps. Stacey's isn't either. The moment of satisfaction is always, structurally, a moment of external reception. That is not a private journey of self-love. That is a public performance of self-love. And there is nothing wrong with performing. Performance is art. Performance is expression. Performance can be beautiful and meaningful and connecting. But there is something deeply wrong with performing safety. There is something wrong with performing confidence about medical decisions on a platform that millions of people watch, when the reality of those decisions may be more complicated than the performance suggests. Because some of those millions of viewers are people who are considering similar procedures. Some of them look at the before and after and think, that's possible. That's achievable. I can do that. Some of them make decisions based on what they see presented as a success story. That is the responsibility that comes with the stage they built. Not just to be entertaining, not just to be authentic in the emotional sense, but to be honest about what they actually know and don't know about the outcomes they are promoting. And that is the question that is now hanging over everything the show, the brand, the business, the relationship with their audience, and most importantly, the question about what is actually happening with two real women who are more than their television personas. We are at a point in this story where the next move matters enormously. What gets said, what gets documented, what medical professionals continue to observe and report publicly, all of it is converging on a moment that is going to define what the next chapter of the Darcey and Stacey Silva story looks like, and whether that chapter is one they write themselves or one that gets written around them. Let's pick up exactly where we left off, because there is a specific timeline here that I don't think has been assembled in one place before. And once you see it laid out sequentially, the pattern becomes impossible to dismiss as coincidence or as critics reading too much into things. Go back and look at the footage from the earlier seasons of the Darcey and Stacey show. Not the storylines, not the relationship drama, just the physical footage. Watch the movement. Watch the expressions. Watch what the face and body do in unscripted moments. Not the confessionals, not the direct-to-camera interviews where lighting and framing are controlled, but the candid moments, the moments in between, the moments when they don't know exactly where the camera is pointed or they've forgotten to perform at full intensity. If you watch with clinical attention rather than entertainment attention, you will notice something. There is a difference between those earlier seasons and the more recent footage that goes beyond normal aging, beyond the natural progression of time, beyond even the cumulative aesthetic changes that multiple procedures produce. There is something in the quality of movement and expression that medical professionals, not gossip accounts, not jealous critics, licensed medical professionals have been flagging in technical language that most entertainment coverage doesn't translate for a general audience. The term that keeps appearing in these professional discussions is procedural accumulation. It sounds clinical because it is clinical. What it refers to is the compounding effect of multiple procedures performed over a relatively compressed timeline on the same anatomical structures. The human body is resilient and adaptive in extraordinary ways, but it has limits. Tissue has limits. Structural integrity has limits. And when those limits are approached through a series of interventions, the results don't always present as obvious, dramatic complications. Sometimes they present as subtle shifts, gradual changes in how things move, how things settle, how the underlying architecture of the face and body responds to normal function over time. The kind of thing that doesn't read as alarming in a single photograph, but becomes visible as a pattern when you have multiple seasons of high-definition footage to compare. This is what the medical content creators who have been analyzing recent footage are pointing to. Not one dramatic moment, not one obvious procedure that clearly went wrong, a pattern, a trajectory. And what concerns the professionals watching is not where things are right now. It's where the trajectory leads if it continues. Now I need to address something directly because I know this audience and I know what some of you are thinking. Isn't this just doctors on the internet speculating about people they've never examined? And that is a fair and important question. And the honest answer is yes. There is a limit to what can be determined from video footage alone, and responsible medical content creators acknowledge that limit explicitly. They say it in their videos. They are not diagnosing, they are observing. But here is the thing about pattern recognition in medicine. It is a real skill. It is a trained skill. And when multiple independent professionals with that training are observing the same footage and arriving at the same concerns independently, that convergence means something. That is not gossip dressed up in clinical language. That is the medical community doing what it actually does, which is look carefully at what is visible and raise flags when flags are warranted. And the flags are being raised by people whose credentials are not in dispute. Let me tell you about the specific moment that shifted this from background conversation to mainstream discussion within the surgery community, because there was a specific trigger, and it's important. Several months ago, video footage of both sisters appeared. I won't specify the exact source because that's not the point, in which both of them were captured in an uncontrolled environment, moving naturally, without the benefit of the controlled filming conditions that a television production provides. What the medical community focused on in that footage was not appearance in the aesthetic sense. It was a function. Specifically, certain aspects of facial movement and structural response that, according to multiple professionals who analyzed it independently, showed markers that are inconsistent with results that have healed cleanly and settled well. The language used varied somewhat from professional to professional, but the underlying observation was the same. What they were seeing did not look like the outcome of a series of procedures that had been resolved without complication. That footage spread through the medical content creator community faster than it spread through the entertainment gossip community. And the reason for that gap is telling. The entertainment press was looking for a scandal, a specific story with a villain and a clear narrative. The medical community was looking at something more technical and more concerning, which does not always translate cleanly into the kind of headline that drives entertainment clicks. So the conversation existed, grew, and intensified in medical forums and on credentialed creators' channels for weeks before it started bleeding into mainstream coverage. And now it has bled. And the mainstream coverage, predictably, is missing most of the technical substance and focusing on the drama, which is why this channel exists to fill that gap. Here is something that the entertainment coverage has almost completely ignored: the role of the specific medical providers involved in the sisters' documented procedures. I am not going to name specific providers because I am not in the business of making legal claims I cannot substantiate. But I will tell you that the plastic surgery community has its own internal reputation economy. Surgeons and clinics that appear on reality television exist in a complicated space. They gain enormous visibility and patient volume from that exposure, but they also gain scrutiny. And when prominent professionals in the field start publicly expressing concern about results associated with particular providers, even in careful, qualified language, the implications for those providers are significant. What I can tell you is that within the professional community, discussions about the specific practitioners connected to the work visible in Darcey and Stacey's footage have not been uniformly positive. That is the most accurate and responsible way I can characterize it. The professional community is not universally impressed, and in a field where reputation is everything, that matters. Now let's talk about TLC, because the network's position in this story is more complicated than it appears. TLC has built a significant portion of its current identity on reality television that documents people in vulnerable moments, medical journeys, relationship struggles, family crises, and frames that documentation as entertainment with a heart. The implicit promise of that framing is that the network is providing a platform for authentic stories, that the people on screen are being served by the exposure as much as the network is being served by the content. That implicit promise is the thing that allows audiences to feel okay about watching what are often genuinely difficult human situations for entertainment purposes. It is the ethical foundation, however thin, on which the whole model rests. When the medical community starts raising concerns about the outcomes of procedures that TLC not only documented, but actively framed as inspiring and successful, and I want to be precise here, the show did not just passively film surgeries. It produced those segments with music and lighting and narrative arcs designed to make audiences feel good about what they were watching. The network's position becomes genuinely uncomfortable because TLC did not just observe a journey. TLC helped construct the narrative around it. TLC is not a neutral recorder of what happened. TLC is a co-author of the story that is now under scrutiny. What does a network do in that position? Historically, the answer has been not much and not quickly. Reality television networks have demonstrated repeatedly that their instinct when cast members face personal crises is to wait and see rather than act, to protect the content relationship until it becomes impossible to do so, to issue careful non-statements and let the cycle play out. I am not predicting that TLC will do something different this time. I am saying that the calculation is harder than it has been in previous Darcey and Stacey news cycles because the nature of the concern is medical rather than interpersonal, and medical concerns do not follow the same news cycle logic as relationship drama. Relationship drama fades. It gets replaced by the next relationship. Audiences move on. Medical concerns do not follow that pattern. They either resolve with documentation, with transparent communication, with evidence that things are okay, or they deepen. And the longer transparent communication is delayed, the more the silence itself becomes part of the story. I want to spend a moment on the audience, because the audience in this situation is not a monolith, and it is not behaving the way it typically behaves in a Darcey and Stacey news cycle. The typical cycle goes like this. Something happens, fans react, a faction defends the sisters with fierce loyalty, another faction criticizes, content gets made, the sisters post something, the energy dissipates, everyone moves on to the next thing. That is the rhythm of reality TV fandom, and it has served Darcey and Stacey's brand reasonably well through multiple controversies. But what is happening in the current conversation is different in a way that I think is being underestimated by whoever is managing their public communication strategy. The voices raising concerns this time are not the critics. They are not the people who have always disliked Darcey and Stacey and found new reasons to express that. The voices raising concerns this time include longtime fans. Supportive, emotionally invested fans who have been watching since the 90-day days, who cried at the airport scenes, who rooted for Darcey to find love, who celebrated every transformation reveal with genuine warmth. Those fans are in the comment sections of the medical breakdown videos. Those fans are posting in the forums with language that sounds less like criticism and more like worry. The emotional register has shifted from skepticism to concern. And concern from a loyal audience is a fundamentally different dynamic than criticism from a hostile one. Loyal audiences who become worried do not move on quickly. They stay. They watch. They want answers. And if answers don't come, the worry transforms into something harder: disillusionment. And disillusionment from a loyal audience is the most damaging thing a reality television brand can face, because it is the audience that cares most deeply that has the most pain to convert into something else. Let me address the money one more time from a slightly different angle, because I mentioned it in part 1 and I want to go deeper here. There is a category of commercial partnership that Darcey and Stacey have either pursued or been positioned for, and I am speaking specifically about medical and aesthetic adjacent partnerships. Skincare, non-invasive treatments, wellness brands, medical tourism adjacent services. These partnerships exist in a commercial ecosystem that is acutely sensitive to medical controversy because the regulatory environment around health and beauty marketing is already complicated, and brands operating in that space have compliance teams whose entire job is to avoid association with anything that could attract scrutiny from health regulators or consumer protection organizations. The moment a name is flagged in the context of medical concern, not criminal concern, not moral concern, just medical concern, those compliance teams become very conservative very quickly. Contracts that were being discussed go into indefinite review. Conversations that were warm go quiet. This is not punitive. It is just how that commercial ecosystem protects itself. And the sisters' income stream, which is already more dependent on brand partnerships and platform monetization than on any fixed salary, is particularly exposed to that kind of quiet commercial withdrawal. There is also a longer-term career question that nobody is asking publicly, but that people in the reality TV industry are certainly discussing privately. What is the next chapter of this show if the transformation narrative is no longer available to it? Because as I said in part 1, The show's entire structure depends on that narrative. Without it, what remains? Two sisters living their lives? Darcey dating, perhaps? Family dynamics? The kind of content that the network has access to from dozens of other casts. Nothing that justifies a dedicated spin-off with its own franchise identity. The transformation journey was the franchise identity. And if the conversation around that transformation shifts from aspirational to cautionary, the network's willingness to keep investing in the franchise on the same terms goes with it. I want to come back to something I touched on in part 1 and go further with it because I think it is the most important element of this entire story and it gets the least attention. Darcey and Stacey Silva are real people. This is not a performative reminder, it is a substantive one. They are real women who have documented their lives with a level of transparency that most people would find unimaginable, who have invited cameras into moments of genuine pain and genuine joy, and who have built careers on the willingness to be seen. Whatever is happening right now, whatever the medical community is observing, whatever the conversations happening privately look like, whatever the real story behind the television story is, there are two actual human beings at the center of it. Two women who have mothers, daughters, friendships, private moments that no camera has ever reached. And the thing I keep coming back to is this. The show has never given them the space to be those full human beings on screen. It has given them a role. The transformation sisters, the twins are on a journey. And that role required them to keep performing forward motion, to keep presenting confidence, to keep framing every development as part of a positive arc, even when the reality of what they were experiencing may have been more complicated than that. The show created a character. The women behind the character had to live inside it. And when the character's narrative runs into something the character was never designed to process, genuine medical complexity, genuine uncertainty, genuine outcomes that don't fit the empowerment framing, the women are left without a script for how to handle it authentically. That is not entirely their fault. That is partly the fault of a television format that commodifies vulnerability without providing the infrastructure to handle its consequences. So here is where we land. Here is the point that everything in this video, both parts, has been building toward. The conversation that is currently happening in the medical community about Darcey and Stacey Silva is not going to stop. It is not a news cycle that will run its course and be replaced. It is not a controversy that a well-produced reel will absorb. It is a conversation grounded in observable footage, professional analysis, and the specific kind of concern that comes not from wanting someone to fail, but from looking at evidence and being unable to look away from what it suggests. Medical communities do not move on when they have flagged something that has not been addressed. They keep watching. They keep documenting. They keep asking. At a certain point, and some of the professionals participating in this conversation have indicated that this point may already have arrived, the discussion moves from aesthetics into health outcomes, from what things look like to what things actually are, from the performance of a journey to the reality of where that journey has led. You cannot edit what is happening internally. You cannot filter it. You cannot set it to an empowerment anthem and have it resolve on a positive beat. The body is not a television production. It runs on its own schedule and answers to its own logic, and it does not care about narrative arcs. Darcey and Stacey built a brand on the idea that they were always becoming, always transforming, always moving toward a better, more confident, more fully realized version of themselves. That is a beautiful idea. It is genuinely beautiful. And I think underneath the television performance of it, there is a real desire in both of them that is not manufactured, a real longing to feel at home in themselves, to feel good, to feel seen and valued and whole. That desire is human, and it is sympathetic, and it deserves to be honored. But honoring it means being honest about it, all of it, including the parts that the show never had the courage to examine, including the possibility that the path they have been on has costs that have not yet been fully accounted for, including the question of whether the people around them, the producers, the network, the medical providers, the yes voices in the echo chamber, have truly been serving their well-being or have been serving the content. Those are hard questions. They are the hardest kind of questions because they don't have clean answers, and they require a kind of honesty that is painful to perform in public. But they are the questions that matter, not the drama, not the tabloid version of this story with a villain and a crisis and a satisfying resolution. The actual questions about what it costs to build a public identity around physical transformation. What happens when that identity runs into the limits of what a human body can absorb? And what responsibility the entertainment machine bears for the outcomes it helped create. I will keep covering this story as it develops. I will keep bringing you the information that is being discussed in medical and professional circles and translating it into something that makes sense outside of clinical language. I will keep doing this because someone has to connect the dots between what the entertainment press covers and what the medical community is actually observing, and because the audience for a show like Darcey and Stacey deserves to have that conversation happening in a place where it's taken seriously. If this two-part series gave you something real, not just something entertaining, but something that made you think differently about what you've been watching, then please do something for this channel right now. Hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't, share this video with someone who watches the show. Leave a comment with what you think, because the conversation in the comments of this channel is different from most places on the internet. It's thoughtful, it's informed, and it matters how I decide what to cover next. Every comment, every like, every subscription is what makes it possible for the tell-all tapes to keep doing this kind of coverage instead of just recycling the same surface-level takes that are everywhere else. This channel exists to tell you the things the reunion show refuses to address, the things the network glosses over, the things that get buried under production music and empowerment montages. The real story, as close as we can get to it with the information that is publicly available and the analysis that credible professionals are willing to put on record. Darcey and Stacey built the stage. They invited the cameras. They told us the transformation was the story. They were right about that. They just didn't account for the possibility that a real transformation, the kind that goes deeper than the before and after photos, might look different from what they planned, might require a different kind of honesty, might demand something from them that the show never prepared them to give. We are watching. The medical community is watching. And the most important audience of all, the one that has loved these two women through every airport goodbye and every tearful reveal, that audience is watching too. And what they want underneath all of it is the same thing they have always wanted from Darcey and Stacey Silva. The truth. Just the truth. Nothing produced, nothing filtered, nothing set to music. Just that. The tell-all tapes. Subscribe. You already know why.